Hey guys, what's going on? This is Brad from the Ed Army, and today I have for you, this is the Off the Cuff, focusing on what we should expect from Pokemon Legends ZA. So, without further ado, let's get into it. But if you're watching your first Off the Cuff, I just want to let you guys know, this is more of the podcast type of thing where you can just sit back and relax and listen while I talk. Maybe you can catch a relaxing break, maybe you're on work, the car ride home, the normal shebang. But the point of this is just so that I can have more free time to just talk about these things and also maybe talk about some things you want to hear. But yeah, just want to give a shout out. So for anybody who is newly subscribed, welcome. If this is your first one, second, third, fifth, or the 10th, this is important because this is the 10th Off the Cuff I have done. So I really am happy about that. So let's just get into the today's topic. And obviously it's kind of starting off with what we should expect from Legends ZA. So I wanted to do this specific episode in Off the Cuff because I could do a lot of videos, and I probably will, regarding a lot of the different elements I have for ZA, but I don't want to just have the kind of prototypical thing where I just do multiple videos of like different aspects. I think it's just better if I kind of just start listing them off so that you guys might expect what could be coming, but it's more so to enjoy it. So one of the things that I was kind of talking about in the past was more so to bring up the different theories of what ZA could be about and kind of the possibilities of what the story could encroach on, because there's a lot of missing elements from Generation 6 and little plot points that we can build upon when they release, obviously, ZA. So we can obviously focus on that stuff. So it really does matter on where we want to go. As you can tell by some of the last videos, I was really going in heavy about this theory of, kind of how maybe a lot of things, but for Zygarde specifically, how it's going to play a role in the game, because obviously we do know that there was a scrapped idea for Pokemon Z. We do have a lot of elements that were never implemented into the game that we can probably see going forward. So, you obviously have to make a lot of jump speculations because unless the Pokemon Company decides, or anyone decides to really release a lot of these things to us, whether it's Game Freak or we get like kind of nods to these things, we're pretty much going on speculation. So we do have those little bits of pieces to go with. So starting off, obviously, like with the first part being what will Zygarde do? It really is hard to kind of expect where we'll go because unless everybody knows what the scrapped concept was, it's a little hard. I think what the original concept was going to be, and this might just be an assumption for me, but I'm assuming that Pokemon Z was supposed to have us start the game, actually, for the first time, I would say, and I mean this for the truth, like the first time we would start with like a proto-legendary, and we would probably get like what we'd end up getting in the Generation 5 games, where our legendary partner would be with us all the way through to the end until we actually make the capture, which probably one of the final boss fights would have been maybe fighting against 100% Zygarde, and you defeat it and catch it, kind of like how Generation 7 would incorporate this with Ultra Necrozma, and after you defeat it, obviously you would end up probably having a normal legendary battle against Zygarde in its 50% form. So there was a lot of elements there I think could have been incorporated, but I do think the ultimate goal was to have us roam the region with the core form of Zygarde and like acquire the little cells slowly, and then you get the 10%, you get 50% form, but I think by the time you were to get to 50% form, you would have this point where this would start the last part of the game. Obviously, we'd have the ultimate weapon. Whatever Z was going to be focused on, whether it was a sequel or like the mastered form of like X and Y, you could see maybe Zygarde being used as the ultimate weapon, kind of like how the anime had it, and basically as a response to stop the firing of the weapon, or even the weapon gets fired, kind of like how we'd have the Emerald situation where Rayquaza does have to stop Groudon Kyogre. You have them fire the weapon using maybe Xerneas and Yveltal, and it forces Zygarde to enter the 100% state or form and battle against the explosion, and then obviously you get your final boss fight, and effectively the legendary, or your box art legendary for Z would be Zygarde. And then eventually, you'd catch Xerneas and Yveltal, but the point is, that was the projected idea. So for ZA, I'm not exactly sure what they're going with, if Zygarde is going to maybe play a part in explaining how the region was redeveloped, would be something that I would understand, because like I said in my previous theory videos, not just trying to plug them, but just trying to kind of base this as a make more sense situation. One of the things I found very interesting was that Zygarde has a lot of implicit lore that we don't know about it. Whereas if we were to look at Xerneas and Yveltal, they do have history that we know of, But I think the Generation 6 games and the anime did a very, I won't say a bad job, but a poor job of really allowing us time with the legendaries. So for X and Y, they got a movie, and Zygarde was the main focus. And then in the games, we do focus on the legendary Pokemon, but they're not really that important if we look at the grand scheme of things. And what I mean is, they're not really important until the main plot of the game is Lysander's going to use them as a weapon. So it's one of those moments where it's really confusing, in my opinion, just because we don't really know what their intended purpose was supposed to be. It's just that they were supposed to fulfill the legendary requirement for the game, obviously. So, this is where I'm I'm actually kind of surprised where they could go, because they have a lot of gaps to fill. That's why I tried to fill a lot of the gaps in my theory videos. So, it's just one of those things where Zygarde doesn't really have too much lore associated with it in its actual region of origin. So you kind of have to base it off of, where they want to go with it. But I think Zygarde being more important from this period in the past would be really cool, where it's the reconstruction of the old Lumia City into the new Lumia City that we would see in the modern day, or start the foundations for that. So, obviously that would be really cool. I think if Zygarde is going to play a part in that, like I said, the A part is really up to whatever they intend to do. A lot of people think that we're finally going to get the Floette form, the one with the Flower of Ruin or whatever. So that is actually kind of cool, but I do wonder what that's going to entail, because this will be a lot of implication, because it would feel strange but also make sense if they find a way to tie in Floette to the story, which would make me assume that, because this would make a lot of sense, that kind of like how legendary Pokemon are treated in the anime, where you can kind of catch them, then they kind of go off to do their own business, that AZ's Floette would actually find a partner and kind of cleanse itself of its problems that it had. And then with Generation 6 games with X and Y, you can kind of see the story play out in the future, where AZ was the one who needed to complete his problems and really fix himself in order for Floette to go back to him, which completes the AZ storyline, which I actually would really like that as a concept, because it makes a lot of sense. But those are the elements that I think get kind of eliminated, and I'd really like it if they were worked on, because it would really help in explaining so much about maybe the region and kind of how this may have been tied into the whole plot point of maybe something with Zygarde, one of those elements where a lot of times people will not think it kind of walks into each other, like the war. In my opinion, the war has more significance, but we don't know it, is the key thing. So I would have loved a, what is it? The Pokemon Legends or whatever we were getting. I don't know why my mind's blanking on it. But the animation where it showed specific areas from the game. I would have loved one about the ultimate weapon during the war period with AZ instead, where we just focus on it. I think it's Chronicles. No, not Chronicles. Jeez, I don't know why my mind's blanking on it. But the point is, I would have loved to have seen that. I think a lot of people would have loved to have seen that, because I think AZ's story really could have been cool to see it play out. You see him probably being just a young guy, or a young person, whatever, trying to enjoy himself in the world, and his partner, which happens to be a Floette, starts to kind of develop its own abilities and wants to, be his partner. But then the war starts, and Floette feels like it's being called to action. He doesn't want Floette to go, but Floette goes anyways. And then one day, he gets the box, which is like the little coffin with the flower, and you find out, wow, Floette's gone. So, those elements are there. And then you can see him building the machine, because he's so destined to bring Floette back. He does it, but then his rage and anger hasn't been quelled. So he decides that it's time to use the weapon. He uses the weapon, and you get the whole situation. Like I said, until they explain where the crash site was and all the implications that maybe Generation 9 was the place where the blast actually hit. So it would explain a lot of the damage. There's just so much to kind of wrap into the lore, that you could bring in lots of regions. You can bring in lots of different areas. So, there is a lot to kind of bring forth, and I would be really happy if they did that. Personally, one thing I would love is that I hope we get some tie into Generation 3, not like a lot, just a little bit, because it would explain kind of, I think, the aftermath of what happened. Because one thing that I find very interesting would be, we know that in the manga and the anime and the games, Rayquaza is able to Mega Evolve on its own, and we're to assume that in the ancient or in the past, it was able to effectively free itself and use its Mega Evolution to save Hoenn when the meteors came to Earth. So it did it again. So my belief would be that in order for Rayquaza to gain its power, you could have some type of tie-in where maybe it explains what the weapon did to the planet. I would really love to hear that in Legends ZA. I know it's a little bit of a caveat from Zygarde, but the point is Zygarde could have more of a trying to establish order and peace across the region, but realizing it has to do it across the world to an extent. I'd actually really love that because basically, a little spoiler for you guys, something's coming to explain why Zygarde's in Alola, so just expect that in the future. But the point is, that's a gap we don't have. That's a gap in time we were missing, is that basically we don't understand why Zygarde is in Alola in Generation 7, and I think there's actually a canonical explanation for it, so I will give that to people, but point is, that's one of the things I'm expecting. I'm definitely expecting Zygarde to be wrapped into the story well. I'm not exactly sure what they're going to go with. Is it going to be Zygarde the Destroyer, Zygarde the Peacemaker, Zygarde, the true story, what they wanted Zygarde to be in Z, is it Zygarde roaming around the region? I don't know what they're going to go with, but I do know that the region is filled with different elements that could be built upon, and I would absolutely love them to kind of develop it in its own way, but at the same time, kind of wrap in this gap that Generation 6 has always had so that people can feel fulfilled. Because Generation 6 was arguably one of my favorite games to just do run-throughs for it because it's not too difficult, but the pool of Pokemon is so huge, is so diverse for the most part. There's a lot you can do with it. Like I always like to do like basic Nuzlocke runs with my own rules, and if you wanted to try that, I would personally say Generation 6 is the way to go, because at the start of the game you have access to so many different types. You just kind of need to know the encounters and where you're working with them and try to make it work. Like I did a bug run of Generation 6. Very difficult, I'm not going to lie, at first. Once you get to Grant, it's like if you're not ready and have a plan, you're going to get decimated. But it was a lot of fun, and there's different things you can do with the games, obviously, but my thing is Generation 6 is a game that I always felt like was not underdeveloped, but it was way too easy if you played it with everything. Like your starters aren't the best, but like when you use access to all the Pokemon they give you, like when you get access to Snorlax, you get access to Lucario, when you get access to that Lapras, which is randomly just given to you, and I don't even get me started on the fact that we get Mega Lucario, right? There's just so much you get handed that makes the game, I wouldn't say less fun, but makes it less hard, very, very easy. Like a lot of the gym leaders, I don't know what they were thinking, but a lot of them were just pushovers. Like the only one that I think really gets a hard stamp in the beginning of the game of the first 4 gym leaders is going to be Grant, because he does have 2 fossil Pokemon and their stats are somewhat higher, and they actually have a decent move pool. So unless you already had Pokemon that were weak against it, I think he's the only gym leader that really gives you the biggest trouble that I could actually remember. And then the rest of the gym leaders I think were easy peasy. Like I even think like going from, not Ramos. I can't. The only one who may give you trouble if you didn't have a setup for it would be Clement. But then I was always easily sweeping him because I always had a rock or ground type for some reason, so that wasn't hard. But yeah, basically the only one I could think that was tough of the gym leaders would be Grant, and then the others, it would never make sense to me why none of them passed. Ramos didn't have Mega Evolution, because it would make sense that they were packing Mega Evolution as like their coup de grace or like their best way to like fight back. So there was a lot of Pokemon that could have had Megas. The Megas don't matter. I'll get into that next, but the point is like there was just a lot of elements that could be built upon, and I don't think we're gonna have gym leaders in Legends ZA. We're probably gonna be going on like some type of mission, so pretty much that's fine. But yeah, like there's just a lot of Generation 6 things that could have been fixed to make it just a little bit better. But, there's that. So pretty much Zygarde, I hope will get wrapped into that. Moving into Megas, because I think this is a plot point people care about. I'm going to be honest, I actually don't care too much about having, new Megas. I think it's because Mega Evolution, in my opinion, as a concept, is cool, but it's always going to be finite, because unless you can just like magically say every Pokemon can get Mega Evolution, it doesn't really matter too much. Like, I think it's because I've also like ended up playing a good amount of like ladder competitive Pokemon, so I kind of get why Mega Evolution wasn't very fun. Because I played Generation 8 games, I played in Gen 9. I built actually my first competitive team for Gen 9, but I never went to any tournaments. I just threw it out on the ladder and I actually built the team. Point that I'm trying to get across is, for sure, like generations for 6 and 7 that had Z moves and Mega Evolution. Mega Evolution is not a concept I think that I find great in terms of always having it, in every game, but I do love it being an option in like every other game to some games, because I think just a cool nostalgic mechanic, but also a cool nostalgic feel to know that your like favorite Pokemon can go even further beyond, kind of like the Dragon Ball thing. But the point is, it's like that. So like I love that. I do think that instead of getting new Megas, we might get a few, but I would prefer it if like we just get every single Mega that's available and some new forms, because I'm a bigger fan of having multiple forms than I am having multiple new Megas, because really I don't understand the concept of having just more Mega Evolution. It wouldn't really make sense for the regional decks, because I'm pretty sure they're going to go like the Arceus route, where they're going to have so many Pokemon a part of the game, and Mega is taking up more slots because they're obviously going to have their own animations and stuff, is like cool, but unless the game's going to be completely different than like Arceus, I think, or in gameplay style, then it's not going to matter as much.
Because Megas are cool, but ultimately that's kind of how I'm thinking about it, because that's one of the constraints, but like really useful things about the Legends game so far, is that by making the Pokedex smaller, we're able to kind of focus around the world more. So the gameplay for Arceus was really good. So I mean, if they really do want to top Arceus, they could try to fit in all of the Pokemon that were available during X and Y, but that's a lot of Pokemon, guys. I think almost every Pokemon was available. No, every Pokemon was available up until Generation 7 before we got Gen 8 games. But it's not just because it was in the code. It was like the Pokedex in areas were really deep with Pokemon, like evolution lines. Pokemon had to be fit in. It's one of those things that made the first couple of 3D games hard, because a lot of the data had to be getting every individual animation of Pokemon put into the game, and that was cutting up a lot of the chunk of data and time into the actual development for the game. So if they are going to do that, that's going to be wild. But I think a number to include, if they're going to do all the Megas, it'd probably have to be a Pokedex that's like, it's got to be at least maybe 300 or a little bit less than 300, because I know Arceus was like 250, 260, 250. I forgot exactly. It was the entire Sinnoh Dex with the additional Pokemon added to it, I think, and then minus obviously the Pokemon that were not available, that would be available in like Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl, or just Diamond and Pearl. The Pokemon that would have been available during Sinnoh, some of them were obviously not available in the main game because they hadn't existed yet, which was kind of a cool lore thing. But more so than that, it really just depends how they're going to go about it. They could craft it, but there's obviously Pokemon to expect. Obviously your fossils, all your Kalos thing. That's one of the benefits, I think, though, of Kalos' decks being super small. You can fit so many Pokemon that are not a part of the Kalos region into the decks that it will actually make it really useful. I'd really like an explanation to why there's very little unique Kalos Pokemon. I think that'd be a cool, explanation to maybe the war ended up wiping out a lot of the nature, so a lot of species died out, and then other Pokemon from other regions took their place, and pretty much you have those elements. I finally get to move on to probably where one of the last things I want to talk about is implications for the entire series. So for Legends ZA, I talked about kind of what we should expect, but I do think that since we got a lot of exposition dump and lore surrounded around Legends Arceus, I think Legends ZA will do something very similar, where its main focus will be explaining some of the nuggets of information and missing links for each region and time. One thing I'd love to find out is that some of the other regions' inspirations, or some things that exist in other regions, would have been massive for this game. So one I've always leaned on, which is small, is the creation of Pokemon contests starting in Kalos. So this is probably just a minor thing, but this is more of an anime thing. Because lots of people speculated that in Generation 4, the gym leader Fantina, who's also a coordinator, was actually descendant or came from Kalos, because she has like an obvious French accent. And I always thought that would be cool to have like a nugget of that type of information, because one thing I always thought was weird was in the anime they obviously had like their new revamped form of contest. I forgot exactly what it was called. Honestly, I might make a video about why I didn't really care for Gen 6's anime for Serena, just because it was just too generic. It was just like we had too many generations of like any type of Pokegirl already doing like a contest thing, and hers was just like too overdone. But we'll get to that in another minute or another video. Point aside I want to get to is the fact that there are little like information bubbles they could fill in by using Legends ZA, because I would still love to believe that Pokemon contests are inspired by those types of events from Kalos, and it would really be cool to have them mention that that's one of the things they like to do is like a showcase, and they really like to have their Pokemon show off, and it kind of inspires people from people from other regions, and then in the Hoenn region they decide to do something very similar, which ends up becoming contests. So, those are an available plot point there. Another one that I would really like to see would be the kind of inclusions for other inspirations for regions as well. So, one I really would like is, this is more of a implication because of the characters in the game. Some of the battles mechanics we had, like the sky battles in Generation 6, I never understood them in terms of why they were put into the game. So I think this would be a great way to explain why someone would want to get in a dive suit and battle you in the air with only like Pokemon that can fly. So that would be cool. Just these extra little nuggets of information. One that I would really love is to know about Rhyhorn races, or riding Rhyhorns, as well as the inclusion of like riding Skiddos and Go-Goats, because I do think there should be some big explanation for that. Because I do think Go-Goat and Skiddo as a whole are more of are kind of like, not a Norwegian, but a Swedish type of explanation for the region. Where I always felt like the people riding Go-Goats and walking Skiddos were more of like the people who have the sheepdog, and the sheepdog would like kind of herd them. So I always wondered if there was some type of implication of an inspiration from like Swedish culture in Go-Goat and Skiddo. So I don't know why I forget their names. If there was a Mega Evolution for any of the Kalos Pokemon, I really think it should go to Go-Goat, because Go-Goat just sucks. And I really like Go-Goat's design, but if they don't give it a Mega Evolution, can this thing finally evolve, please? I'm really hoping this thing can evolve, because Go-Goat is one of these Pokemon where I'm like, if you can just evolve it and give it some more stats in the right place, change up some move distributions, this thing could actually do something. And I'm not just saying do something as in be competitive. I mean, do something as in like you would want to bring it with you on your game. Because Go-Go's biggest problem is it doesn't do enough. And that's just me criticizing some of the Gen 6 Pokemon. But there's a lot of them that don't either have fully evolved lines, or they're just like 2-stage evolutions that don't do anything, and they're overshadowed by every other Pokemon that were a part of the region that wasn't a Kalos Pokemon. So, like, the fairy types that were first released. Aromatasi and Spritzy line. That line was horrible. They should fix it. Now, Swirlix and Swirlpuff, honestly, peak Pokemon. They work. They're okay. They're fine. Leave them alone. And then just some of the other ones is just, I don't understand what their purpose was. I understand, like, if you look at them from the gameplay standpoint, Noivern's a good one. It's just really, really fast, and it has good stats to hit with. So, it doesn't need defenses, so that doesn't matter. Clawitzer and Clauncher, I really like them, but, I wish they were a little bit more bulky in their stat lines, only because when you play with them, they usually get knocked out too quickly, but they have really good moves. Dragalge and Skrelp, really cool, really amazing, really could have benefited from having a second evolution to a third evolution. It's like a middle stage between Skrelp and Dragalge. So yeah, I can't wait to see Hawlucha. If Hawlucha gets a new form or something, I would love that. like an original form. Geez, I'm just trying to think of all the Kalos Pokemon that are actually in existence. Goodra obviously got love already, so I don't expect anything for it, but that would be cool. Anything for that. And yeah, like Talonflame obviously literally been in. I think it's one of the only Pokemon to survive the interchange. I think it's been available ever since it was released. So since Generation 6, available Gen 7, available in Gen 8 in the DLC, and then available in Generation 9 in the main base game. So maybe that was a big hint, by the way. So I'm just kind of putting it out there for you guys. Maybe that was a big hint we were getting a Legends EA game. I did find it strange that Talonflame was like prominently shown in like one of the first trailers for Scarlet and Violet. Although I knew it was gonna like take a major it was gonna be not major but be available. I was like, they're really showing off Talonflame a lot, and I'm like, Talonflame isn't a new Pokemon. I mean, it's not a new Pokemon in any capacity. And if anything, I think it really overshadowed the Generation birds for Gen 9, which I think was supposed to be Wattrel. And I had no idea that Wattrel and Kilowattrel were supposed to be the regional birds. That actually kind of made me sad. I had no idea they were. I thought they were just generic birds thrown into the region. So, maybe they should have worked on that a bit more. But, yeah, moving off of that, pretty much there's just a lot to do with it, with Generation 6. So, you don't really have to reinvent the wheel here. I think it's just more if they want to add the nuggets of information. Like I said, the key thing of this game is just to make the missing story and lore for Zygarde and really attach it to the broader spectrum of Generation 6, because Generation 6 was their rebound game, I think, because they wanted to they were kind of surprised that people didn't like what they did with Generation 5 with the sequel games of, Black and White 2 to Black and White. And I think Generation 6 was definitely meant to be their rebound. It was meant to be the big, step up to show that Pokemon wasn't going anywhere, it wasn't going to fall down in power, which was absolutely true. The only problem was, in doing so, they really re-leveled the game a bit so that, it was easy to do. It wasn't really a challenge. The story was, it was all right. The villains, the villains' freaking motivation made sense, but it was so, over the top, and then the legendaries really got overshadowed by the story. That's the one thing I was really confused by, is that the actual story for Generation 6 for the non-character, or the non-main character, is actually really cool. It talks about effectively a war-torn world at some point, and this old, really tall guy walking around is responsible for that. But at the same time, you have Lysander, who doesn't really care about what happened in the past. He wants the world to be in his own image, and he's going to perform that in the way that he wants, and it leads to effectively destruction on a monumental level. And he would gain that by, taking the legendary Pokemon, which isn't explained at all, really, throughout the game. So, kind of the misstep, I think, is that Yveltal and Xerneas really don't feel like the legendaries in their game. They just feel like they're a part of the game, but they're not. They weren't a focus of the game, which I think would be remedied in most games later. Generation 7, they obviously made Lunala and Solgaleo evolve technically from Cosmog. So those elements were made sure to be added to the game. Like Generation 5, obviously Kyurem and Zekrom obviously were very much a part of the game, being carried as in the stone or already awakened by N. The stuff is, the legendary has to play a part in the game. Even when you have something like Palkia, Dialga in Generation 4, which some people could argue didn't play a lot of the game, they were still prominent in the form of the statues in Eterna City, and they're always constantly mentioned by other characters, so the hype is there. Like, Xerneas and Yveltal kind of just show up, which is kind of just funny. Like, all of a sudden, when you get to the last arc of the game, you're told, oh, they had the legendary Pokemon. And in my opinion, I'm like, what? That's crazy, right? But the point is, I hope they fix this. I think they're gonna put in the missing gaps that we need for the future and the past. So pretty much that's all I've got for you today, guys. So I hope you guys did like this off the cuff. More videos are coming, so don't worry. And I am gonna keep it up. So this is Brad from the Ed Army signing off. And for all of you out there, to sign on.